Hello, and welcome back to the Long Distance Love Bombs podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg. And before I introduce today's fantastic guest, Amanda Ruggeri, I need to give a little bit of backstory, a little bit of context for how this episode came to be. And so, if you will return to the year 2023 with me, I put a post out on Instagram that was admittedly, in hindsight, quite snarky, a little bit sarcastic, and didn't land quite right with the world. And the post said, "It's so impressive how all the racism experts who became public health experts are now Middle East historians and geopolitical conflict experts." And I wrote this quite quickly. I thought it was kind of fun, and then I just put it out on the internet with not much context in the caption, which was admittedly a mistake on my part. Thank you to all of those folks who kindly left comments to help me understand that. Anyway, I did another post where I talked about my premise and my concern about that issue. I talked about how expertise is mistakenly associated with certainty, and that creates a lack of humility, leaving no room for learning. And I think that learning is key to understanding. I think that understanding is a prerequisite for kindness and compassion. And I think that a lack of compassion hinders connection and healing, both individually and at scale. And so this was a concern for me. And I started thinking, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I found an expert on experts? And I realized, gosh, how do you do that? How do I find an expert? What makes somebody an expert on experts? And it was this kind of meta inception moment for me. But then somehow I came across Amanda Ruggeri, who graduated from Yale and Cambridge. She's worked as a political reporter in Washington, D.C. She's lived in US, in Italy, in the UK. She has spent years on the BBC International Features team. She's been the editor of BBC Future. She's a professional journalist. She's created documentaries. She's been interviewed as an expert, and she's super cool. And so this woman graciously agreed to come on the show and talk about experts and expertise. And this conversation was great. And as you'll hear, it slowly descends into this rabbit hole of grandiosity in which I realized that this problem of expertise and experts is occurring at a scale and a speed like never before. And it has far-reaching implications. But a few of the highlights of this conversation, we talk about a few of the red flags to look for when you're observing experts or you're trying to assess whether or not to believe something that someone is saying. Those red flags include the person speaking in absolutes, the person projecting their expertise on every topic, on everything, people that are giving advice on their journey alone, so an N of one, a sample size of themselves, and people that struggle to admit mistakes. Additionally, Amanda talks about the 4 R's that she uses to assess experts when she's putting together a story for the BBC, when she's creating a documentary, and those include relevance, recognized, recent, and reputable. Anyway, this is a fun one. It is a big topic. Lots of ideas are bouncing around, and it's a very conversational format. Amanda and I are just attempting to get our brains across what is happening, and we're sharing some thoughts. Hopefully, the intention is that this conversation helps you to navigate the increasingly polarized and contentious landscape that is the internet, and in particular, that is social media. I hope this helps. I would love to hear some feedback. If you have thoughts, ideas, suggestions for future conversations, or if you have witnessed some blind spots in our conversation, if there are any gaps that we did not see, any biases that we skipped over unintentionally, please do let me know. I'm here to learn and work through all of this stuff with you, as you know by now. So, that said, please enjoy this conversation with Amanda Ruggeri. Amanda Ruggeri, Amanda Ruggeri, Amanda Ruggeri. Welcome to the podcast. It's good to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
I passed the test.
You did. You pronounced it flawlessly. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm pumped for this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and I tried to get some people to talk about this and found that it was quite a
Mm.
struggle. The topic of expertise and how do you find trustworthy experts? And I realized in the process of trying to find an expert to talk about experts that I had to actually work through my own system of figuring it out. Uh, so for those listening, though, before we dive in, uh, who are you? What's your deal? How have you stumbled your way into my show today?
So, I am a journalist, first and foremost. I've been a journalist for most of my life at this point, which is a little scary to think about. So, even though I have to say I had kind of the same thoughts about like, oh gosh, do I really have expertise in what expertise is? Like it feels a little bit, a little bit meta or paradoxical in a way. But I do think if there's kind of anything I have experience with, at least, it is sussing out experts just because I've been doing it for so long. It's such an important part of what journalism is. And in terms of what kind of journalism I do, I mean, I've done everything from, I started when I was like 14, writing a weekly column for the newspaper, which is a bit embarrassing to remember now. And I've done political reporting, reporting from Washington, D.C. I moved to Italy and wound up focusing more on like archaeology and history and culture and those kinds of topics, food, travel, very fun. And then wound up at the BBC doing lots of different things, but especially focusing on science journalism the last few years, and wound up running a website called BBC Future, which is bbc.com's international science and evidence based website. And did that for a few years. And then a year ago, went freelance because my family moved to Switzerland and I couldn't, unfortunately, take the BBC job with me. But I still write for them a fair amount. So yeah, so journalist first and foremost. That's the relatively short answer.
Yeah, and if only there was something that happened in the last few years around evidence-based science that you could write about, huh?
Oh, it was really tricky to find subjects. And I have to say, I became, oh God, I'm going to get the year wrong. I can't remember now if I became editor in 2019, 2020, but it was, right before something not insignificant happened. And yeah, it was a big challenge because we're a relatively small team who rely on a lot of freelancers. So it's not just kind of keeping on top of the news and really the news behind the news, because what I focus on and have always focused on really is features rather than like breaking news stories. But it was coming up with a lot of features ideas, and then also making sure that our stable of freelancers were, and they were, like, this is not to doubt any of them, but high quality enough, because people will send you pitches who you might not have worked with before, right? So it's I think as a journalist and an editor, it's not just sussing out the sources you're interviewing for stories. It's also sussing out sometimes the people you're working with and commissioning to write and report stories. So it cuts in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So I think that you're the an ideal candidate to like talk about this stuff because your job
Mhm.
literally for one of the most reputable news organizations on the planet was to parse out the good quality respectable humans from the rest and like your um occupational success or reputation was dependent upon how good you did that. Is that a fair judgment?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's
Like
a really good way to put it. It's no
Like if
pressure.
you, yeah, like if you put some wild zany kook on the BBC website, I feel like that's gonna not be great for your career trajectory. Um,
Correct. We tried to keep that to a minimum. Yeah.
yeah. So stepping back, when I was looking for somebody to come talk about expertise, and I forget how I found you or your name popped up on Instagram or something, and I kind of scoped you out, and I kind of went through the tick 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 of, oh, she's worked for the BBC, she went to Cambridge, she went to Yale, like she has these experiences making documentaries, she's well traveled, and I was like, okay, like that was my first kind of filter.
Mhm.
Um, how do you approach that first filtration when you're getting a dozen possible people to talk to or a dozen possible stories to consider?
So this is a great question that I thought about in a little bit more of an organized way recently because I was asking myself that. Like, this is something I kind of automatically do. And I think a lot of experienced journalists and editors just automatically kind of instinctually do on an everyday basis. But what is it we're actually doing? And I realized that when I think of what I'm looking for with a potential source, interviewee, whatever, it basically for me comes down to the four R's. So, first of all, the question is, right, do they have experience at all? Like, do they have any experience? But all experiences are not made equal when it comes to expertise, right? So, the first R for me is their experience relevant? And in medicine, that might be scope of practice, is what it's called in healthcare. So, for example, there might be a lot of MDs out there who advise or sell products having to do with nutrition, but nutrition isn't necessarily within the scope of practice for all MDs. So, do they have additional expertise, additional experience that is targeted to whatever it is they're talking about, right? So, first of all, is the experience relevant to whatever it is the person's advising about? The second thing I think about is their experience recognized? And is it regulated? I mean, obviously, it's really easy to say, like, oh, I have experience, I have expertise in this thing. It's much harder to have some third party authority agree with that, right? So you might look for things like, and it sounds like you kind of did this when you were looking at my profile, academic degrees, work accreditations, work experience, awards, accolades, things like that. It's just kind of another filter. And then the additional thing that I like to think about too is that recognition regulated? Because as you'll know, in the space that you're in, right, like there's a lot of stuff that you can even get a certification for, but anyone can offer that certification. There's no regulatory body, there's no cross checks, there's really nothing. So I always feel a bit better, obviously, when the recognition somebody has is also regulated by some authoritative body. And then is it recent? So that would be the third R. A lot of professional courses, professional organizations, sorry, require reaccreditations, refresher courses, things like that. And there's a reason for that. It's because research practices get updated over time, and you need to stay on top of it. So is somebody's experience recent, or is it ongoing? Ideally, and then finally, and this one I think can be a little bit tricky from the outside. But I also like to find out if somebody's experience is reputable, because obviously it's all well and good to, have that fancy degree, be working in a specific industry. But if all of your colleagues think that you're hacks, I want to know, or you're a hack or a quack, like I want to know why, right? So this is not to say that professionals obviously disagree all the time and academics disagree all the time. But when possible, I like to try to dig a little deeper and see if there are disagreements. Is it just a matter of people having a difference of opinion that's valid, or is there something else going on there? Like, has this academic had papers retracted? Have they, stuck to their guns about some finding they've made, even when the scientific consensus has said no, like that's really wrong, or was based on flawed data or whatever? Those things can be a little bit harder to parse. But if I were to really do a deep dive on someone, if, for example, I were really going to lean on somebody's opinion or somebody's research findings, especially if they were controversial, that's something I would look for as well.
Yeah, the four R's. I love that. It's
Before, yeah.
it's very like social media friendly as well. Like,
I mean, I would be lying if I said I didn't come up with that for a social media post a few months ago. But it felt sticky to me. Like I was like, oh, even I can kind of
mhm.
remember that and go through it as a rubric for myself, right? So yeah, I
Yeah,
just thought it was handy.
and even as you were going through that, on each of those, I thought of like a person or a moment in my past in academia. Like for those that are listening that don't have any idea who I am, I've got a PhD. I was in science for a decade, working for different governments, and different moments pop to mind where I would hear an expert, a genuine world-class expert in a very specific topic, ranting about something that was like somewhat related, but that I knew like he was not an expert in that thing, right? So like an expert in fish or coral reefs suddenly talking about weather systems or political decision making.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know what's so concerning about that? You know, the authority bias, right? So it's this cognitive bias where we hold somebody's opinion in higher esteem if we consider them to be an authority or an expert, even if what they're talking about isn't the thing that's within their realm of expertise. So if you think, you know, a doctor, a lawyer, whatever other professional, I'm not picking on those particular industries, but those people are authority figures, you might naturally be more likely to think their opinions on everything hold more weight, even when it's something that has nothing to do with medicine, law, or all the rest. So I think that's what makes that especially kind of a problematic thing.
Yeah. And even as you're saying that, I've realized that when I will read something or I'll see something on the internet by a doctor or a PhD, I'll just Google their name and see what their degree is in as like a very quick check. And even you said before we started recording that before you agreed to come on this show, you did some due diligence on me and did a little bit of investigative reporting. Maybe could you mention what that process was like or why you did it, so to speak?
I will be honest, it was pretty surface level because I followed you for a while and I
Okay.
have trusted your content. But I did God, I Googled you, I looked at your website, I think I looked at your LinkedIn. I mean, these are things that again, if I were to like feature you in a profile as like the number one whatever, I would have gone deeper than this. But yeah, just basically looked at like what your degree was, the fact that you were a scientist, you'd done scientific research, climate change, communications, and yeah, it seemed like I guess basically what I read about you aligned with the way that you put yourself forward, and that's a whole other aspect of this that I think doesn't always happen when you're looking into somebody's background. That always gives me pause. But obviously, it did with you.
Yeah.
So well
Can you
done.
say more about that? Can you say more about the discrepancy between the
Mm.
presentation and the background or what comes to
Mhm.
mind there?
So we talked briefly before this chat about,
Just to those
I think,
listening that can't see her, there's like a twinkle in her eye, and there's a like, I feel like an internal decision making going on of like, how much do I say? What do I talk
mm,
about in this space?
mm,
So I'm giving you a chance to
yeah,
pause and
thank you. Yeah, because I don't want to, I guess, so I'll be a little bit general, but so I became a parent a couple years ago, and I also, as a journalist, now write about child development, and so I follow a number of influencers in that space online. And I think it's especially uh, it's an especially vulnerable space when people are trying to sell things, because obviously there's an economic incentive to market yourself a certain way. And I think on social media, often people only see that short little however many character that is bio. So it's not to say that people who do this don't have more in-depth information about their background on their websites, let's say. But I don't know how many people are going to their websites, right? They're just looking at that Instagram bio or whatever. And so there's people, there's examples I can think of where, for example, someone presents themselves as being an expert in psychology. And the implication is that it's child psychology because that's the kind of space that they sell products in. But when you look into their background, it's something called forensic psychology, which is very different from child psychology. To my understanding, you don't have to have really studied child psychology to be a forensic psychologist. That's the kind of psychologist who works with courts and with legal cases. So they present themselves as a psychologist, knowing people will think that they have expertise in probably child psychology, but their actual expertise is very different. For example, and that's something that I see happen a lot, often when I kind of do a little bit more of a deeper dive into somebody's background.
do you think that's a consequence of that authority bias that you mentioned previously, or is it related to the general lack of scientific education that the majority of the population has? Meaning, they might just see psychologists and think, oh, I don't have experience in psychology. I don't know any psychologists. They must be legit. Like, not recognizing all the different subdivisions and particular fields of study, or
Yeah,
both, I guess.
totally. And I'm not saying that individual isn't legit. in that
Oh yeah.
field. It's just that they're using it to market themselves for something quite different that I consider to be a little problematic. Yeah, I think it's all of the above. And that's why, on my social media platform the last few months and in general, something I've been thinking more and more about is kind of how to help empower people to just kind of, run these filters themselves and figure that out for themselves. Because I think what's important to say too is it's not that anyone giving advice who doesn't have all these 4 R's ticked or whatever is giving bad advice, right? Like you can get great advice from somebody who has none of this stuff. But I think that when we're deciding how much to weigh the information somebody is giving us, how much to weigh the advice they're giving us, and especially when we're thinking about whether to shell out, pay for that information, it's just worth knowing exactly what background that information is coming from.
Yeah. I think it's especially tricky because there are examples where the individual has no credentials, degree, qualifications, etc. And they are world class. I'm thinking of a couple of friends of mine who are like
Totally.
world class, lights
Yeah,
out, best in the world at what they do. And like they don't tick all of those boxes. And so
totally.
because of these like outlier examples, it's very easy to just uh it's a gray area, right? Uh and so again, like your suggestions are somewhat like a benchmark. But again, I'm sure that you've come across people in your journalism career that you're like, nobody's heard of these people. They're like just these wacky genius people that everybody knows and respects in the field, which makes it even harder for the average Joe on the internet trying to parse this out and piece this together.
Yeah,
Uh, have you come
100%.
across people like that? Is there anyone that
Totally.
stands out where you're like,
Totally. Well, I don't know. And I'm not sure I know enough about like everything that people have done that come to mind to like,
right,
confidently put names forward. But yeah, there's certainly people whose advice I've learned from and respected who, don't have PhDs in psychology or whatever. I mean, yourself included, right? Like you're a scientist. You talk about relationships a lot. As far as I'm aware, like you don't have a PhD in psychology, but you do a great job talking about relationships and all these different things. So, 100%, it's not saying that people need these credentials, need these things in order to have incredibly valuable points of view and things to communicate. It's just, it's just a filter. And I think especially for me, that bar is always going to be high because I think in terms of like who am I interviewing for stories, and the stories I write are science-based stories, often about research, and I'm usually interviewing scientists, researchers, people very involved in those fields.
yeah, yeah, and you're in a tricky position as a provider of information from a trustworthy source. Like you got to get your ducks in a row and really
Yeah.
make sure you're. How has that affected the work that you do individually as a person on the internet? Like, have you taken your track record with the BBC and all of the caution and care? Do you find that you implement those tactics in the same way when it's just your Instagram and it's just your social media presence?
You mean in terms of my content and how I present
Yeah,
myself, or do you mean so that it's yeah, that is something I've thought about, and it's like people have I think somebody commented on one of my posts like, oh, you're talking about scope and da da da, but like you're a science journalist, you write about child development, and like you don't have a PhD in child development. I was like, yeah, like that's true. My 4 R's are look a little different because I'm a journalist, right? So I have a lot of credentials, experience, stuff that I can show you about how I'm an experienced journalist and science journalist and science editor. I would never proclaim to be a scientist, and I would never call myself an expert. That's why when we started this, I was kind of like, I don't really feel like I have expertise in anything. Like even saying I have expertise in sussing expertise makes me uncomfortable. I'm somebody who talks to a lot of experts and communicates what they have to say.
but like from my perspective, that's exactly the reason that you are an expert. Like in my experience, the best experts, the most knowledgeable, badass experts that I have come across are humble enough to say, maybe I don't know, I'll get back to you. I'm not an expert on all of this, which is like one reason that I try to periodically chime in on Instagram and remind my followers that I'm a fucking moron sometimes and that they shouldn't trust me. And that there are many other opinions and ways of doing this. And so like when you were expressing caution or concern about being portrayed as an expert, that to me like ticked one of the boxes that I look for in an expert, which is this humility to, yeah.
So I love that you're saying that. And I love that you do that because I feel exactly the same way. And I was thinking a few months ago, again, for another post, but just to kind of organize my thoughts around things too. Like, what are some behaviors I see from so called or perceived experts that are red flags to me in terms of actually trusting that expertise? And one of the first things I was thinking about was when they can't admit that they're wrong about something. When somebody, queries something or points out that something is incorrect and they, on social media, delete the comment or get defensive or don't correct that thing. And that to me is such a red flag because I think, intellectual humility is really important, right? Like if somebody is not intellectually humble and open to new ideas and curious and open to dialogue, like how can you trust that they really know what they're talking about? I mean, you have to be able to do those things to really know what you're talking about, right? So, yeah, so 100, I couldn't agree more. I think that's so important.
Yeah. And I think just from a scientific perspective, that's like the fundamentals of science, which is this is what we know for now. And this is our best guess at how this is all working. And then new papers come in, new research is done, new discoveries are made, and you have to adjust your
Yeah.
lens all the time. And so I think to your point, when I see somebody that is just on the soapbox, like this is the way it is, this is how it works, all of you other people are morons or scoundrels. I'm like, nah, that doesn't feel right to me. That doesn't feel aligned with what how I believe things should work, how they do work.
Well, and I love that you mentioned, I mean, scientific uncertainty, right? Like exactly what you're talking about, where, yeah, people, I think this is a whole other topic, but I think people have this idea of what science is and what it isn't. And I think it confuses people a little bit because they expect scientists to be like, this is the science tells us this, like, this is the answer from science. And it just doesn't work that way, right? So whenever I see an expert who's talking in terms of like absolutes or guarantees, like eliminate sugar from your diet and you won't get cancer, or like any number of things that you hear, right? I mean, that's like another huge red flag in terms of behavior for so many reasons. I mean, one being that usually that's not true because those absolutes just usually aren't actually evidence based. There's always some element of uncertainty in science, and also how can you say that anything is going to be true for every single individual and every single person's physiology? I mean, there's so many reasons, but that to me is always another big red flag too.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of that in the diet and food and wealth industry of this is how you should eat. Every person on the planet in every culture with every body type. And those sort of pronouncements, I always they just concern me also. Like, really? I should just eat meat and just only meat? Like that is what about like I don't know.
Yeah, so many
You get it.
questions.
But I
And
actually
it's
like go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, and again, I see it in the parenting space too, which is like that baffles me even more because not only are you saying absolutes to parents, which probably aren't evidence based and everything else we talked about before, but it's also something that's not only going to affect their decisions, but decisions that affect their child. So it's just that I think the like potential for harm can sometimes be even greater, you know?
Yeah. So this is somewhat of a tangent, but I'm good at tangents. From like a philosophical lens, looking at the future and social media and expertise, it strikes me that there is this kind of movement towards silos of individual experts having their communities that are
Mm-hmm.
reinforced by the content. And I'm concerned by the lack of nuance in our culture, and I'm concerned about the lack of having disagreements. Do you have any thoughts on any of that?
Oh,
Is that too much of a rabbit hole?
no, no, just that I feel, I mean, it's so much the same. Like I bang on all the time about we need more nuance in on social media and also just, I also think in terms of science journalism too, I think sometimes, really well-meaning reporters, but it's really easy to fall into traps of also kind of putting studies or new findings forward as being really certain and not including that nuance and stuff. So I don't think it's just on social media that we struggle with that as a society. Um, I
So
don't know.
you
I would
think it's a
like.
more collective thing that like in traditional news, political decision making, et cetera, that there's like this.
I think it's a tendency because I think we all know that as news has moved online, there's been a real need to grab more eyeballs and more of a tendency towards clickbaity headlines. And a lot of the time, that's the only thing somebody sees or reads is the headline. So if the headline presents something as too cut and dried and black and white, that's the impression that anybody skimming that web page or that social media platform comes away with. Of course, I don't think that's all outlets, and I think a lot of outlets handle that really well. But yeah, I think there's been a proliferation, if I can speak correctly, of that. And I do think it's on social media too. It's funny because I'm starting a column for the BBC that's kind of about like media literacy and some of these different things we've talked about. And I was writing the first one today, and a lot of the stuff I was looking at was around the very concerning. There's two trends that I think put together are kind of concerning. One is that there's a decline in how many people are consuming traditional media, right? And following the news in general. And and there's a rise in people that are getting that information from social media. And at the same time, the other thing that research kind of shows over and over is that the more people get their political information and current events news from social media, the less informed they are. So if you put these things together, um, it's just a bit, yeah, it's a bit concerning. And I don't know if that goes back to, the question of like absolutes that you were talking about before, or something, or there's a bunch of other aspects of that we could get into. But um, yeah, I'll always feel hopeful about the future of like the information industry and the media and stuff. But some of the reading I was doing today was making me feel a little concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, because I imagine if you ask those people who have been assessed to be less informed, like if they are indeed less informed, many would suggest, no, no, like I'm more informed. I know the truth. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can't trust the news. You can't trust experts. You can't trust politics. It's all rigged. It's all corrupt. And so there's this really odd thing happening whereby the world at large, I don't know, want to say the world at large, but like we might not individually recognize where we're at in an neutral, objective lens.
Mm,
Yes?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is
I think
that
that's exactly right. Yeah. And I mean, one of the findings from one of the polls, I think it was a Pew research poll I was reading today. I can't remember, but it was the heaviest social media users were the most likely of all the cohorts to have come across, conspiracy theory or, a false claim or an unevidenced claim. They were also the least likely to think that this kind of misinformation was a problem. And that's, again, not a great combination.
right? It's like a self-perpetuating prophecy fulfilled kind of thing. It's like, we're good. It's like everybody on the Titanic, like listening to the band. Like, no, it's cool. This I love this jam. This is a banger. And everyone, there's a
Exactly.
few people like ringing the alarm bells. Like, no, hey, shut up. The band's playing.
Exactly.
They're not done.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh, but to your point about the red flags, I'm going to try to get us back on track
Yes,
somewhat. Talk
sorry.
about
That was a rabbit
expertise.
hole.
No, because I would walk that rabbit hole for hours, as those listening probably know by now. But I found a post of yours, red flags when trying to assess
Mhm.
expertise. You
Mhm.
mentioned speaking in absolutes, meaning
Yeah.
like this is the right thing, my way or the highway.
Mhm.
I'm the soapbox genius guru guy or gal.
Mhm.
Second one was being an expert on everything. Have
Mhm.
we covered that one? Is there more to say about that?
Not, yeah, I mean, I guess that's related a little bit to the relevance and the scope of practice idea, right? It's just, the more somebody's going outside of their area of expertise, the less expertise they're bringing to the table, but they might not realize that, and their audience might not realize that. And there's a great book I feel like you would really like. It was written by a former colleague of mine called The Intelligence Trap. And what he talks about is the conundrum of the book, basically, that he explores is that smart people not only make mistakes and fall for conspiracy theories and all the rest, but sometimes even more so than people who are, less quote unquote educated or less quote unquote intelligent. And there's a few different reasons for that he goes into. But one that I found really interesting was that intelligent people can build up these really detailed arguments in favor of whatever junk it is that they believe. So he has this great example of I think it was a Nobel Prize winner, a Nobel Prize winning scientist who believes all kinds of things about, the HIV not causing AIDS and various other conspiracies. I mean, this is a Nobel Prize winning genius, but he hasn't realized kind of what the limitations of his knowledge and expertise are, right? And he's using that brain to argue for all of this other stuff that scientists conclude is bunk. So,
Mm.
um, so yeah, great book. Definitely recommend it.
It reminds me, I've talked to a few different people through the years. So I work like as a life coach. I talk to people, I help them through stuff. And I've said a few times to people, like, your problem is that you're really smart. And because you're really smart and really sharp and really quick, that you are able to egoically convince yourself of anxieties, fears, probabilities, etc., that you believe are true, but they're just choices. They're like probability guesses, right? And so I'm gonna check that book out for sure. I've said that to myself, and like I've told other people that I'm like, I'm a really smart guy, but I'm also a freaking moron. Like, routinely in my relationship, I'm reminded of my own inadequacies and blind spots. Thank goodness. Like
It's a
hallelujah.
good partner that keeps you humbled. Yeah,
Oh my
absolutely.
gosh. I have the best partner for humility. Like the other night, I just like came and sat down on the couch and she just pointed at the kitchen and I had left like two cupboards open. I'm like, I didn't do that. She's like,
Yeah,
Jeremy,
yeah,
like, yeah, okay.
yeah.
Okay. Third point, third red flag for looking
Mm,
for experts is that they are giving advice from their journey only as a sample
mm,
size of one.
mm.
Can you explore that?
Yes. And again, I realize in like the personal development relationship space, like a lot of people might not have formal credentials in psychology or whatever, and they are basing a lot of advice on their personal experience, and it might be great advice. So, like, again, this is not to denigrate, it's just this is again often something I see where people are not only saying like I have great advice based on my experience, but like my experience is going to be everyone's experience. And also, I had this experience, and like that means that what I'm going to tell you is science based or evidence based. Like those things don't go together. Like, your anecdote is not evidence, right? That kind of famous, I don't know how famous it is saying. So yeah, that's always a red flag to me, as well. Yeah.
Or like, would an example of that be someone giving advice in a sweeping broad brush? For example, if this is happening in your relationship, you should get a divorce because that's what I
Yeah.
did, and my life worked out great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Or like, again, I don't know why the sugar thing, but like I cut sugar and I haven't gotten cancer. I cut out sugar and I feel great. Like everyone should cut out sugar. Or again, in the parenting space, I see it like All babies should sleep 7 to 7. I've done a lot of stuff randomly with baby sleep in journalism. So like all babies should sleep 7 to 7. And then you dig into it a little more and it turns out like there's no scientific basis behind that, but that person saying that has a kid who sleeps 7 to 7. So it's yeah, and I think it's a really human thing to fall into. Like we always it can be really easy to generalize our own experiences and think it's going to be equally useful for everyone, but that's just not the case.
Right. And so then the red flag might be this is the way, this is the route, this is the only possibility. And like the inverse, the green flag might be, hey, there's many ways to reach the summit of the mountain. There are many paths. Here's one. If it works for you, great, but do check out the rest of the map.
Nuance again, right?
Nuance.
Like nuance. Is it that hard? I don't know. It feels like on social media it is, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fourth one, struggle to admit mistakes for those
Mm,
experts. We touched on that a little bit earlier, but can you say
yeah.
more about the role of humility and open-mindedness as it relates to expertise?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is something that the intelligence chat, my colleague's book talks about at length too, is kind of one of the ways to gird yourself against making mistakes and not learning from those mistakes is to remain intellectually open and humble. And like if somebody points out those mistakes, gee, maybe they're, maybe it is a mistake. Like maybe this is true. Maybe I need to look at my process or look at my conclusions, or maybe my logic was flawed, whatever. If you don't do that, not only do you not fix that mistake, but you never learn from the process. And this is another pitfall that I think a lot of intelligent people fall into, is that kind of perfectionistic way of thinking, right? Where it's like, I can't make mistakes. So I'm going to just like stick with what I'm really good at and not make any mistakes. But then that means I'm not pushing myself to fail and to learn from those failures. So yeah, sorry, that's a little bit of a tangent, but I think that intellectual humility is really important. And you'd be shocked at like, I mean, a couple of times in the last few months, on like big accounts that claim to share information in a really unbiased way, I've like really politely commented being like, hey, like just, this number, whatever it was. And the comment will be deleted. And not only will the post never be corrected, but in future posts, they'll continue to make the same error. And you just have to wonder, like, why? Are we that afraid of being wrong about anything? Like, are our egos that fragile that we can't
Mhm.
correct ourselves? And I think for me, coming into it as a journalist too, it's a really bizarre thing because if I make a mistake in a story for the BBC, and like, that happens, right? We're all human. If somebody spots it who's not my editor or the copy editor or anybody else on the team before it goes live, or me, because I like to fact check myself, if somebody in the public catches that, it has to go through a whole system, right? Like they email the BDC and that email works its way to my team and it goes to my editor and that editor and it gets emailed to me and I have to work out whether it was a mistake and go back to the source, and it gets corrected. There's accountability. And I think that's the other thing that's so concerning about social media. There's no accountability. Like somebody can say whatever they want. And sure, there's, supposedly moderators on these platforms, but you and I know they have a very hard job to do and they seem rather overwhelmed. So yeah, people can just keep on with whatever misinformation or just genuine mistakes that they're making and never address them, never correct them.
And to your point about deleting comments, the average reader or viewer would never know because there is no disagreement because it has been filtered so easily. Um, and so it creates this echo chamber.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. I just feel like the more we talk about expertise, the more cans of worms that I'm realizing this actually entails of like the
Mm,
literacy of society, the way that
mm,
social media functions, the the way to communicate respectfully while having disagreements. Like these are all
mm.
big topics.
Yeah.
They could have like a whole podcast just about expertise. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, it's crossed my mind. I'll start with this column at the BBC and see where that takes me.
Yeah.
But no, there's a ton, and I feel like it's one of those subjects like media literacy. It sounds a bit like we're going to talk about expertise. You know, it can sound a bit dry, but like you said, it's a theme. It cuts across so many different things, and
Mm,
I think it affects people's lives in so many more ways than we even know.
yeah. And even just psychological biases of there could be people that tune in that are like, oh, a woman telling me about science. I'm not going to listen to that. Or like, oh, good. Someone from the traditional news, the BBC, bought and sold by Big Pharma or what. I'm not going to listen to her. Or like Jeremy Goldberg, white guy. Yeah, great. What we need is another white guy talking about anything. Right. And so we all have these implicit biases that we don't even realize are happening, which affect our evaluations. It's so much more complex than I thought it was when we started this conversation. I was like, oh, the
Yeah,
four R's, the four bullet points, the four red
this
flags.
will be easy.
We'll nail it. This is going to be such a short and sweet, succinct thing that I could send to followers. Like, here, just read this. Just listen to this. Ah, no,
Nuance though, right? We wanted to touch on the nuances because that's what happens. That's why this stuff does not fit into like a nice little
mhm,
200 word grid post.
right. That's why it's going to give you content for days too, for your
Yeah.
column and the work you do.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we have not touched on that you are like, yo, Jeremy, you buffoon, how have you not asked me about blank? Or, gosh, I'm passionate about this and I want to shake the planet and shout from the rooftops. Like,
I guess the only thing that we didn't touch on that I was thinking about and researching lately that I thought was interesting is the other elements that go into when we consider somebody to be an authority. So, like, we think we just look at somebody's experience or profession or whatever, but there's actually, speaking of cognitive biases, right? All kinds of other information we're taking in about someone that signal to us how seriously to take their opinion. So, you know, you mentioned race, right? Gender, whether somebody is a native speaker in the language that you're speaking, whether they seem similar to you, whether they speak quickly. That's often considered a sign of intelligence. Whether they're attractive. Like there's all kinds of things that we know sitting here have zero bearing on somebody's intelligence, expertise, whatever. But whether we like it or not, that's affecting how seriously we're taking that opinion. So I guess that's the other thing I would just caution people to be aware of is it I guess what this all comes down to is it the argument itself being made to you that's compelling and logical, or are you being swayed by something else, whether that's how this person has marketed their experience in themselves or the person's accent or the way they look or whatever, right? So, yeah, I just think it's so important to be discerning about all those things.
mm, I think it's a really important point. And one to add to that would be from a social media perspective is the number of followers. Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's a big number. They have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. They must be an expert. And again, caveat, in many cases, that's pretty accurate. And that is an example of something that demonstrates their value. But knowing the industry, like you could buy 100,000 followers today for like $80 and have a big number next to your name or a blue check as it used to be earned somewhat.
Mhm.
It's another one. So it sounds like sort of what you're saying and what we're talking about is like questioning everything all the time, even
Which
when
sounds exhausting. I know.
like even when you've ticked all the boxes and are finding, I mean, but to be fair, I do this. If I have ticked all the boxes, someone that I know and respect, worldwide genius, and is saying something, and I find myself being like, hell yeah, like I agree. I question that. I'm like, do I actually agree with that? Like, should I change my mind? Or am I just like getting force fed content that builds my ego and reaffirms my identity and my belief system? Um,
Yeah.
I'm like actively trying to find people to poke holes in my foundation, I guess, is one way that I sort of view all this.
That's so great. I mean, if everyone did that, I think we would be much better off.
Yeah. Yeah, or like looking for ways to improve rather than looking for ways to stay who you are with what you know.
Like, because one of the traps, right, is you can find out about these like cognitive biases and these logical fallacies, right? These things that people say in arguments that makes their argument sound right, even though it's not. And then just apply them to people you don't agree with. So it's so important to also run, like you're saying, your own opinions and your own arguments and arguments of people you agree with through those filters just as closely as people you
Mm.
don't agree with.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we've got that same kind of polarization issue we were talking about before.
Yeah. And then just going back to this relationship context of wrapping that in interpersonal dynamics or having conversations with your loved ones, there is such power in recognizing just a simple sentence like, I can see some truth in that. Or,
Mm-hmm.
I could see why you
Mm-hmm.
would feel that right now. It's just like, ah. So it's not just about trying to find random science articles on the internet, but it's actually quite foundational to any kind of relationship you develop in your life. I would just like caveat that, asterisk it, highlight that. Like this stuff
Mm-hmm.
matters. Friends, loved ones, colleagues, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think should we wrap it up? Do we I
Yeah,
could
I
talk to you for like
mean,
another 2 hours,
I
unfortunately.
know. So could I. But yeah, I think, yeah, this is probably a really good place for people to start
Yeah.
with. And
Okay.
yeah, just be careful out there.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway.
Grab your flashlight. Don't forget your towel.
Exactly.
Good luck. But for those that want more of Amanda Ruggeri, sorry, uh, where can I find you? You've referenced the BBC. I know you've got an Instagram account that I'll put in the show notes. Anything
Yeah,
specific?
so on social media, I'm Mandy Ruggeri, but my byline for my journalism is Amanda Ruggeri. So when I remember, I try to update my website, which is amandaruggeri.com, with the more recent stories I've done. I haven't done that for a few months, but some of my stuff's on there. Um, yeah, but Instagram is where I'm trying to be a little bit less present this year, but that's where I am often, more often than I like to admit.
Yeah. Is that like an intention or a resolution to stay off
I just want
socials?
to be more um, intentional and efficient with the time I'm spending there. Because I think last year I was very much trying to like build an audience there for various reasons, and
Yeah.
I still want to do that, but I just want to make sure I'm spending my time in the best way.
Fair. I mean, this is a whole other series of podcasts, but like they're so efficient at hijacking your attention. Like when they changed the search feature to be on top of just the perfect videos to capture your attention and send you down a rabbit hole, I was like, these motherfuckers. And I still get sucked into that. Like
Yeah,
I have to like try to search before it loads. It's like my trick.
yeah. I've started
Anyway.
just uninstalling,
Oh, really?
so I think that's going to be my like post. And I know the algorithm hates that, but like post, do whatever, and then uninstall because it's very tempting otherwise to just
Like just delete the app
wait.
from your phone, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I did a story for New Scientist last summer about this is also a whole other thing, but how these companies are scraping more data from you than most of us realize, and selling them on, or using them for whatever. So also after reporting that story, I was like, I've done this. Gotta just turn that thing off and put it in the closet sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other scary topic for another day.
Is that a an article that you wrote online?
Yeah. Yeah,
Can you
so it's behind a paywall, but it was the cover story actually for their print issue over the summer. And
or
it's
whose
it's
print
called
issue? Sorry.
for New Scientist.
Oh, yes, I've heard of that.
Yeah. So so yeah, it's I think the headline is something called like Nowhere to Hide, how like data companies came for your privacy and found it or something like that. But it's yeah, I can ping it to you if you want to put it in the show notes.
Okay.
It was a pretty wild thing to report.
And changing exponentially daily, it
Yeah,
seems.
exactly. That's the thing. There's becoming so much more sophisticated and sucking up more and more granular data.
Are this is like a
I feel
uh,
like this is such a downer to end this off. Sorry.
no. I like being a downer. And if you like being a downer, is it really down, right? Um, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future? Or like, where is your head at? And because you have a child,
I mean,
you just wrote an article about how big social media is scraping all of our data, selling it. I'm sure you're switched on to the tech evolution of AI and VR and all the rest of
mm,
it. And like,
mm,
you're an expert on expertise. You're like in the weeds more than most.
mm.
Where do you sit in terms of like reading the tea leaves for the future?
I mean, I think you have to be optimistic, right? Like on some level. I, more than kind of like thinking about what the future might hold, because that I must admit, especially I used to do a lot of climate change journalism, and that does make me concerned for reasons other than even just AI and data scraping. What I like to focus on is kind of like what we can do in the present. And I think you very much kind of seem to come from that same philosophy. Like, what can we do to try to make the world a better place here in 2024 so that that scary future doesn't come to pass? And obviously, having a little kid, that's just become all the more prescient for me. So I guess that's how I get my sense of like hope is by trying to focus on those things.
Yeah. Focusing on what's in your sphere of control, so to speak,
In
what you
my
can do.
tiny sphere of control. But yeah, like just what can any of
Yeah.
us do to make this change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
What about you?
Oh gosh, I was gonna wrap it
Last
up. I was trying to
question.
get out of
I
that
know.
one.
Sorry.
Um, I'm the same. I obviously concerned about the future. And I guess one thing that helps me is like zoom in and zoom out. So
Mm,
like if I zoom in at my own little life in this room, in this present moment, I joke that I'm a connoisseur and collector of fine silver linings, right? So
mm,
like, can I find the silver linings? Can I find the beauty? Can I find the joy, the gratitude, the presence? Can I just zoom in and be grateful for all of it, right?
mm,
That here, now, I'm okay. I have blessings and beautiful things around me. And then when I zoom out, can I remember that, I'm a speck on a sphere spinning around a fireball in vast infinite nothingness. And like, what the heck? But also historically, can I zoom out and recognize that, at virtually any time or at any decade ever, like there's been some gnarly stuff going on. There's been nuclear
existential.
warfares and world wars and racism and, you know, all the rest of it. And so I think that I find to be comforting when I realize that that is just a part of the human experience to be somewhat in terror about what is happening and what's to come, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I
And
think
that
that's true. It is
like
weirdly comforting. Yeah.
our flavor of terror is just different to those in the 1500s and the
Mm,
1200s and the,
mm,
1700s. Like
mm,
their version of terror was there's a bubonic plague and like everybody's dying and we have no idea what the hell's going on, right? That must have been scary, like
mm,
real gnarly. Um, so yeah, zooming out, zooming in, I find to be helpful, and then just like doubling down on what you alluded to around my immediate sphere of control. Like what's in my
mm,
life? What do I have control of? What's manageable? Like what do I
mm.
need? Do I need to go work out? Do I need to go have a hug? I need to say something. And then all the while through all of that, doing the best that I can to simply just enjoy the ride. It's like, this might end tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, so yeah,
Yeah.
listening to the band on the Titanic, I guess, is the answer. Like, damn, you know. Did you see that? This is a complete off the rails thing now, but did you see that thing on Instagram about the DJ comedian guys talking about the Titanic and how how
And I've
it.
been off Instagram over the like last
Okay,
2 weeks. I
so
uninstalled it. So,
I'm gonna botch this, but I feel like you're the kind of person that will appreciate this, and hopefully someone listening. But there's these DJs talking about the Titanic, and they're laughing and being absurd, and one of them says something like, "Isn't it crazy that there was a moment in the Titanic when everybody in the water was like at maximum peak physical health before they died because of the cold plunging?" And then they started talking about Wim Hof. Like, what if Wim Hof was on the Titanic and he's out there doing his breathing? And it's just like so inappropriate and so outrageous. But I think that to me
are
demonstrates exactly what we're trying to get our head around, which is like, you just have to stay positive somehow. And
you saying we're
anyway,
the people cold plunging? Like we're at the peak health before?
yes. They're like a minute in, 2 minutes in, they're all like, oh, well, I feel great. Yeah, my inflammation's really gone, you
But
know?
that's us. I'm like a societal,
Yeah,
level. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
we'll
I
see.
love that.
Anyway, thank you for being here. This was fun. I appreciate you. Would love to have you back anytime to talk about whatever the hell you want. And
I love that.
good luck with it all. Okay, there you have it. That was my conversation with Amanda Ruggeri, an award-winning journalist and editor, someone that has worked at BBC, has done stuff for New Scientist, Scientific American. She's great. And I've included links in the show notes to her website and her Instagram and a couple of other things. Encourage you to check her stuff out. The content that she puts out on Instagram in particular is very digestible, takes a lot of big ideas, makes it very easy to understand in a way that is visually appealing and just great. So check that out. Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. Please go ahead and leave all the 5-star reviews that you can. Subscribe, spread the content, spread the message. Send me a message and say, hey man, you really screwed that one up. Or hey man, proud of you, you did a great job. Or just do that for other people. Or even better, look in the mirror and do that for yourself and say, hey, I'm proud of you. You're trying. Life is hard. Sometimes bad stuff happens, but you're getting through it. And that's what we're here to do. Let's try and make kindness cool and compassion commonplace, make the world a little bit better than yesterday. Thanks for being here, and I will talk to you soon.